So let's get into my study. And an understanding of the history of fat and fat phobia really helps us to understand how fat interplays with females and their sexual experiences. And this is very different than focusing on a medical model of energy intake and output, or how various biochemicals combine to produce different energy saving and producing systems. And so this is quite different to look at it from the aspect of society or cultural impacts being a driving force around the context that women experience their sexuality. So that set the stage for my research. It's basically an intersection of fat studies, sexual health studies, and women's studies. One of the most striking parts of the initial research that I saw was done in a study by Chen and Brown in 2005. What they found when they were asking participants what your least preferred sexual partner would be out of partners that were healthy, missing an arm, used a wheelchair for mobility, had a diagnosed mental illness, or had a historically sexually transmitted disease, and obesity or fat. So they said, what's the order that you'd like to have sex with these people? And out of all of them, the fat people or obese people were the least preferred sexual partners compared to people who had all kinds of other variances in terms of experiences. And fat seemed to be right at the bottom of their preferred list. Also, another study then found that men, and regardless of their weight or shape, had more romantic interest in non-obese females, whereas females were not as selective regarding fat around males. More recent in the research, there was an examination of media in the United Kingdom. And to speak to what James was saying about fat in Europe, they uncovered the dominant theme of what they referred to as fear of fat in the media of the UK. And that reinforced negative attitudes of fat women. In one big review about body image and sexuality, there was 57 studies that were reviewed, and they found that body image affected all domains of sexual functioning. The authors said that in Western society, the sexual appeal of a female is based predominantly on her physical appearance. Other researchers have concluded that BMI does not correlate with subjective well-being, but that one's attitude towards their weight, their relationship to their body, is what correlated to how they feel about themselves. So the problem identified in doing this research was that fat women internalize harmful cultural messages about fat, and that may engender negative sexual experiences and attitudes. But I also want to suggest that this might not necessarily always be a problem per se, that what we're really trying to investigate here is the interaction of sexual health and fat and women. And that has also led to some areas of advantage or pride that some women can go towards. So this does not mean that internal harmful messages always will relate to negative experiences, but that there is some kind of interaction around the harmful cultural messages. And that's what we need to identify when we're talking to our clients about sexual health. So the purpose of the study, it was a qualitative single case study to examine, explore the meanings and perceptions of the sexual experiences of fat women who all resided in the same city in Western Canada. I used objectification theory as a theoretical framework to help me interpret the themes that were coming out of these women's lived experiences. Objectification theory is a model for understanding the social context in which women experience their sexuality. This theory suggests that women partly base their sexual behaviors on how others perceive them as sexual objects. In cultures where females are looked upon as physical objects for sexual desire, the theory posits that self-objectification can lead to psychological consequences and sexual dysfunction. So the first research question to come out of this that I wanted to know: how do fat women perceive their sexual experiences in the context of their weight and size? The second research question: how do fat women perceive the cultural messages about their bodies and sexuality? So trying to find out more information about what they are taking in from the vast array of cultural, societal, or parental messages that are out there to be absorbed. And the third research question is: how do fat women struggle differently with their perceptions about their sexual enjoyment and satisfaction? So this is really about, why is it different from women to women? How are those differences manifested? Why are there those differences? And so what's the range of diversity in terms of fat women's experiences in sexuality? As I briefly said, the population is a single city in Western Canada, but it is not to be named in order to help protect more of the confidentiality of the participants. The sampling was done where participants just needed to report that they had a body mass index above 30. I didn't weigh them. I didn't ask for anything like that. I also, if they self-identified as female, then that was also taken in there. So there were 10 women that were interviewed and sampled, who all self-reported female identity and being in the obese category, using BMI as the standard. In terms of the sample that I did get, the average age was 37. And how we did that was I put up flyers in physicians' offices, right? And so physicians' offices might be a bit different than the sampling that I would get. Also, I used Facebook, so I used the Canadian Obesity Network Facebook groups. So trying to get a little bit of diversity in the sampling, but hard to analyze exactly what those differences might mean from where we got those samples. Supposed to be about 10 women who can represent the cultural tone of the city that they're in. So it's hard to say how transferable these results can be, because really they could be varying from city to city, maybe even pockets within cities. The samples will be very different. So I wanna mention that, because what I'm reporting on is from my sampling of women in one community. So potential participants then phoned me, either because they saw the flyer or they saw it on Facebook. Phoned me to indicate that they were interested. Screening for inclusion criteria was: do you identify as a female? Do you think that your BMI is over 30, or have you been labeled as obese by any medical professionals before? And then that they were okay with confidentiality and ethics procedures. So we did, of course, informed consent at the start of those meetings. I also had everybody complete the Body Appreciation Scale version 2. And in addition to the hour-long interviews that we were doing. So there's some correlations that I had in the findings there between the Body Appreciation Scale and some of the findings from the interviews. I also gave everybody a resource handout. Now, this was actually kind of controversial. The ethics board at the university strongly wanted me to have resources for every client, every participant, because they were really worried about talking about this subject matter. They were quite concerned about how it might impact people's emotions. But when I was actually giving people these resource handouts at the end of their interviews, most of them uh, didn't want it. Didn't really think that it was very necessary or even possibly appropriate. And so I thought that that was a really good reflection around kind of even the patriarchal institution of doing research and the hoops that we have to jump through that are really not based on the lived experiences of our populations and are just really based on old assumptions. So also, as the last part of it, I did member checking. So after I went through all of the themes and I used NVivo to transcribe everything and record everything and come up to what the findings were, the 7 themes that I end up having. And I called all of the participants and went over all of the themes with them to make sure that they made sense to them, that there wasn't anything they wanted to add or modify to it. So that was a really, really helpful part to do the member checking process, make sure that what I was getting made sense for the participants. So in terms of that, what I used was Braun and Clark's 6-phase approach to thematic analysis. So rereading the transcripts, generating initial codes, combining those codes into themes, examining how those themes then relate to the data and the theory, right? So theory, and in this study in particular, was around objectification theory being the theoretical framework that was used. So understanding the meaning of those themes then in context, trying to take the findings and put it back out into society in a sociocultural environment that is very fat phobic. And then finally, the member checking part, just to verify.